So before I get into the chapter itself, I do want to take a moment in order to touch a little bit more upon something I had talked about last week with the chosen one trope, because my mind was kind of running a mile a minute and I couldn't gather all my thoughts together. So I just thought I'd take this time in order to kind of just dive a little bit deeper into what I was talking about last week, particularly the reason as to why I like how the chosen one trope was used the last chapter, and the reason why I like how it's executed in this instance, which is also touched upon in this chapter, is just with how the trope is used. It's seen through the lens that because Izuku is the final wielder of One for All, he has to make a choice, a single choice, and stick to it. It doesn't matter as to what that choice was. He had to make it, and he had to harden his resolve to pretty much that decision. Like there's when in the current situation, for pretty much Izuku, there's no room for second guessing or doubting his actions anymore. And going forward, if he falters even for a moment, then that's the end. There's no more passing on the torch, and All for One's grip on the world will be everlasting. It genuinely puts in perspective that Izuku and his friends are the only ones capable of putting a stop to this. And even if there was Izuku would have to wait for like an entirely new generation to come around in the hope that someone among that generation is miraculously quirkless. But it's like he can't. He has to make the decision. The reason is, but he has to make the decision now because there's not going to be any other in this current situation. There's not going to be any other one to inherit the corpse. There's no one else. It's him. He alone has to handle this. And I think, and one thing I liked that was done in this chapter as well in order to reinforce that is that I think in some ways, even though it wasn't really touched upon too much, really touched on, I think one thing that he realizes that Izuku realizes that he has to do in order to find is that he has to come clean to his friends. He has to tell them everything of pretty much all for one, one for all. Like it's again just as Hawks had said, it's kind of a bit of it's kind of that Hawks is gonna find out one way. So like Izuku, I think he's resolved himself in order to tell his friends and for them to kind of finally just in order for him to finally reach out to them and say, okay, we have to do this. This is the last chance. We have to stop this. So yeah, in that sense, I like how it's handled in that there's just no going back now. And yeah, let's talk about Nana's little test she gave to Izuku to measure his resolve. And I really like Izuku's answer here because it only shows he has the resolve to do what Nana couldn't, but I also like how this little verbal confrontation between her and Izuku is sort of Nana's acceptance of her own failures and just overall acceptance of her own failures as well as a sort of self like just self acceptance of how much of the current situation is her own fault. Like she's pretty much we see her obviously break down in front of Izuku and she says, yeah, everything is my fault, but are you going to make the same mistake I did? That's kind of the whole purpose of what she was trying to do. And I think Izuku's answer overall, it did give her a tremendous amount of solace and closure, knowing that Izuku won't necessarily make the same mistake she did through how much he's resolved himself in order to save Shigaraki. And that's, I think, one of the other big things about this chapter did is that it showed that it from showed that whatever the outcome is and whatever ends up happening to Shigaraki, whether he lives or he dies, Izuku has resolved himself to save Shigaraki first. That's the first thing on his mind. He doesn't care if Izuku is forced to kill him, is forced to kill Shigaraki. He wants to save Shigaraki himself from Shigaraki from All for One first before he decides whether or not before he gets to the point of saying is Shigaraki going to live or die. So it's like I like how he's putting the idea of I want to save him first, and then we'll decide what happens beyond that. So yeah, he genuinely wants to save the little boy trapped in the darkness, and I love how all of Shigaraki. And one thing I especially love about Izuku's answer more than anything else is how all of Izuku's encounters up to this point have, in some way or another, pretty much formed the conclusion he came to. Even the encounter that people necessarily didn't care for much, which is the battle between Gentle and Labrava. Like every single, I like how that also especially came back into play. Like people obviously weren't the biggest fan of that when it came out, but I love how that fight in particular has really come back into play for it. Um, and it's because of all these counters that Izuku just now knows what he needs to do when facing Shigaraki again. And I think honestly, I think above all else, the most important thing that's emphasized here is that even though Izuku's perception and outlook has changed, his goal has not. His goal has always been the exact same, and it hasn't faltered in the slightest. His one goal above everything else has always been to save people. That's the one thing he's always wanted to do, and the one thing he wants to continue to do with Shigaraki. Like again, I'm repeating myself at this point, but he wants to save the boy. He wants to save the boy trapped in the darkness before he decides what Shigaraki's actual fate should be, and I kind of love it for that. With that said, obviously one of the bigger things with this chapter is we get introduced to the second and third wielders of One for All. And just based on the ominous nature of their introduction, I get the feeling these two are going to be less complicit and compliant when it comes to how they interact and work with Izuku, and not necessarily in being like unwilling to teach Izuku or anything like that. But just that I think their methods of teaching Izuku in order to use their powers is going to be a lot more of a hard knocks lesson than what he's been getting from other predecessors. Like I think they're going to be the ones who actually want to see if he's worthy, and for him to prove that his worth to them before they actually allow him to like access their power or something like that. And the other thing about these guys is they definitely, again, going back to their presence, that ominous nature of their introduction, they kind of, just from their introduction, they kind of have this presence like it feels like they've seen some shit, like they feel like war veterans almost, which almost makes me wonder if these two are like All for One's brother, in the sense where they also lived through an equally dark period of Hero Society history, because that's just the overall vibe I'm getting. Like these guys definitely know what they're doing. Definitely have seen the darkness of what this cycle of One for All and All for One has brought. So yeah, I think it's going to be a bit. I feel just the relationship in general between Izuku and these two is going to be a little more antagonistic than what it's been before, honestly. And just overall, there's a lot of visual imagery I just love from Horikoshi in this chapter as well. Like the dark void of All for One consuming the flicker of light surrounding Shigaraki, the big blank backdrop of Izuku approaching young Shigaraki and just offering his hand in the exact same way that he did to Bakugo when they were kids, and even something as simple as seeing All Might Shade crying. It all did so well to show in with so little that how much Izuku has pretty much kept believing in the singular idea to save people. Like again, that's the only thing he's ever believed in. And I love how it just kind of how these images just kind of reinforce that. It just shows that yeah, Izuku all he's ever cared about is trying to save people. And yeah. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Lister Control. Death Knight of Anime signing off. Later, guys.